On this episode of the CBD University podcast, we introduce you to the U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. Hear from the CEO on the mission of the organization and its work in our evolving industry, plus the latest on the CBD industry and where it's heading in the final quarter of 2020 and into 2021. This is the CBD University podcast, and it starts right now. I'm Joe Augustinelli, the host of the CBD University podcast. And if you are a returning listener, thank you for coming back to tuning in. And if you are a new listener, we are glad you found us on your favorite podcast platform of choice. Don't forget, you can also watch full video episodes of our podcast on the Global Widget YouTube channel and the YouTube channel of our brands. The mission of the U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development is to move society forward through legalized cannabis. And as CBD is legal in all 50 states, it's still an evolving industry. Sometimes it feels like it changes every single day. My guest today is the CEO of U.S. Cannabis, Michael Patterson. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. And for those of you watching on YouTube, once again, going remotely for this one via Zoom. So Michael, thanks for taking time out of your usually very busy schedule to join us for the podcast.
Joe, wouldn't pass it up. I love what you guys are doing, and I definitely want to provide as much information out there as possible regarding CBD and cannabis, hemp, everything regarding the U.S. as well as international markets.
Yeah, and first let's start off. Talk about a little bit your past and the path as to where you are today with U.S. Cannabis. How'd you get involved?
Sure. So I'm a lifelong healthcare executive, started as an occupational therapist and nursing home administrator from college, moved from North Carolina. Yes, that's where my accent is. I'm not from Alabama, but went and moved into Florida right when I was 23 as a therapist and worked in rehab centers, outpatient hospitals for many years, moved up into the nursing home industry to where I got my nursing home administrator license. And then I ran a chain in Florida called Avante Group. We had 20 facilities within the US. We were in 4 different states. We did about $230 million in total revenue per year. We had 2,500 employees. We had 2,500 patients, and we got sued all the time. So a lot of that risk and compliance and regulation I'm extremely used to. Over the years, I saw a lot of destruction in the nursing home industry regarding medication. The average patient over 65 is on 13 prescription drugs per day. We would see people who were addicted to opiates in their 80s and their 90s. And then finally in 2013, I had a breaking point to where I realized unless somebody who has a lot of knowledge and regulations and rules and understands how this would move forward from a medical aspect gets into this business, I didn't see the ability to move forward. I felt like the industry needed some assistance, who had at that time who had been pushing the industry from CBD as well as THC or cannabis related. I felt that they needed somebody to really help push this forward and to be able to talk the same language to regulators that they needed to hear and to move this forward as an industry. So started U.S. Cannabis in 2014, and it's been an amazing journey. We started working with Indian tribes who were looking to legalize cannabis, THC, as well as CBD products way back in 2014. For some reason, the Indian tribes decided not to at that time because they didn't trust the American government. I know that's very shocking to a lot of people, but a lot of trust, and we all know the federal government keeps changing policies. So fast forward to 2020, we now operate through a joint venture in Africa with a company called MGMC Pharma. We have 6 licenses for medical cannabis as well as CBD, and we export product out of our main facility in Lesotho. It's pronounced Lesotho. It's the little country inside of South Africa, and we're currently shipping THC and CBD products to Australia, and we're getting ready to start shipping into Europe. We're also working with a cryptocurrency company that will be coming into Oklahoma to help with the cash problem that we currently have there and the lack of banking. And this cryptocurrency is currently in the final stages of getting a US SEC no action letter. For those of you not familiar with that, basically it would be the third no action letter or approval by the SEC in US history. And it would allow us to be able to bring in cryptocurrency legally, ethically, and not have any trouble bringing in investment. And it's legitimate. And so working on that. Two other main projects are we're waiting any day for a medical cannabis license in the state of West Virginia. They're supposed to announce this week. And we are waiting for, we're working on one of our big projects is to create a hemp and cannabis research zone in Florida. It would be 100 miles by 60 miles. And we equate it to a new Silicon Valley for the planet. We really need to bring in the experts of this industry and new companies, create a ecosphere and build this from the ground up, because we feel America is the place for innovation, and we have taken a back seat in the CBD and cannabis industries, and we need to take our step forward and lead the world into this new cannabis economy.
And speaking of which, when we talk about, U.S. cannabis as in the United States, and you alluded to this, you've been all over the world when travel allows. So to discuss the industry, really we're talking about the industry from a global perspective. How, for those who may not be, familiar with the industry overseas as much as they may be here in the United States, how is it different?
Well, in 3 words, it's a mess. Okay, so if you look at it in European markets right now, they're pushing CBD, in different countries are pushing different regulatory schemes, I call them. So one is novel food. So novel food is a certain regulation you have to make to have CBD. Right now, the UK is pushing that, as well as Germany. Then the UK comes out 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago and says, no, we're going to call it a narcotic. And so everybody's hands was up in the air. This novel food regulation is going to go into effect in March of next year as of right now. And so if you're an American company and you're looking to sell your product into Europe, you've got until March of next year, because if you don't register it by then you're not going to be able to sell it. Another issue that we're finding is certification called GMP, manufacturing practices. Europe is special, and so they want everybody to have EU GMP or European Union GMP. And right now, I'm not aware of any American company who has that certification. So it becomes very difficult, because we actually try to help American companies get their products overseas. And that's the first question when I get called is, hey, can you sell my product in this country? And I say, do you have your EU GMP certification? And when they respond to say, what's that? Then I know they don't have it. So that's the main challenge we see overseas. Is a perfect example. I've got that we're selling to in Australia, and we're looking at the average price right now for EU GMP CBD. It can be somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 a kilo, and this is just raw crude. And so now you're looking in the U.S., it's down to 500, 400 a kilo for crude. Sometimes even lower than that. Isolate I've seen at $400 to $500 a kilo. So it's a different market. And overseas, I tell people product is important, but paperwork is more important. So if you don't have the right paperwork, it doesn't matter what you're selling, you can't sell it.
In the U.S., we've heard so much about regulations and guidelines at the government level, interim final rules, guidance, are all terms thrown out there, and we've talked, as I mentioned, to Rod on past episodes about this, but where do you see the industry headed as we now get into the final quarter of 2020 and into 2021?
That's a great question. So 3 main things that I see: distribution, consolidation, and regulation. So distribution, you really have to have your distribution down. Because if you have the best product known to man, if nobody knows where to find it or nobody knows how to get it or can purchase it, it's not going to help you. I think the online model is great. A lot of people do use that, but actually to have it in the stores where people can find it, start understanding what your brand is good. It's great. Consolidation. I think a lot of CBD companies are going to go out of business. They got in early. They thought it was a money grab. And the challenge is, as more brands enter, then price becomes a factor. If you have 2,000 CBD brands, we're seeing this in Europe right now. You have it to where the pricing is still pretty good in the States, but in Europe, you're having 1,000 milligram CBD oils go for 25 pounds, which is like $50. It's very, very cheap. So I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on a lot of companies companies, and you're going to see brands consolidate under one corporate partner. And then that way they have the staying power and they can use their distribution. And then the last is regulation. We have to have clearer regulation. It's just too ambiguous. Rod Kite, great guy. I love Rod. We've worked together for years. He knows better. Now, he's an attorney. He knows better than I do that the regulation has to be consistent. So to be able to get that investment from people to back your businesses, they have to understand where the industry is going from a regulatory aspect. So they know you'll be in business in 2 to 3 years, and you can eventually move past the U.S. border and go into international trade.
And we talked a little bit about this in that past response. You know, one of the biggest challenges, and you talked about it, I mean, thousands, and Rod's talked about it on past episodes, thousands of companies have entered this industry thinking, oh, I'm going to make a quick buck. But do those evolving regulations, you know, really separate the companies who have that staying power because they can meet any of the guidelines and regulations, you know, with compliant, quality, and potent products that are independently lab tested and have that staying power?
Well, that's a great question. I think that what I see is it really depends on the focus of the company. You know, you have all these companies right now that they don't spend money on compliance. I just saw an article on LinkedIn where people were complaining that the bud tenders, when they go into a medical cannabis dispensary, are throwing out all these types of claims and there's no backing to it. And so to me, that's setting yourself up for lawsuits. As I said at the beginning, I used to run nursing homes. I got sued all the time. I've done over 100 depositions. So I understand more than most. You know, you don't want to be sitting there with a wrongful death suit because somebody took your CBD because you didn't want to spend the money to do a proper COA and you don't have a compliance program. So a lot of the companies that will succeed are the ones who have invested in compliance. And the adage I always use is you're always going to pay for compliance, and it's always cheaper if you do it up front. That's a great adage. I love it. What would you say, and we talked a little bit about this, but what would you say the biggest cause for confusion in the industry among consumers, retailers, and the general public regarding CBD products is? Is it that whole education and not really knowing what it's all about? I think a lot of it goes back to cannabis because they don't understand the difference between hemp and cannabis. I talked to a U.S. congressman a couple years ago before the hemp bill went through, for the farm bill. He didn't know the difference between hemp and cannabis. So if our elected officials don't even know the difference and they think CBD is marijuana, then how do we expect the general public to know? So a consistent information and consistent education on CBD, continued research on CBD to be able to bring that information down to the everyman and the everywoman is something that if brands can do that, half the battle, in my opinion, of a CBD company is getting through all the confusion about your product. And if you can break that down and have people trust your product and get specific dosing on your product with backed up research, that's the companies, in my opinion, that are going to stand the test of time. And what would you say, we've talked about the outlook for 2020 to 2021, but what would you say are the biggest threats to the industry as we head in towards this final quarter into 2021? Well, at the end of the quarter, I think the election. The election is going to have a big impact on our industry, not just for medical cannabis and recreational cannabis, which will be huge, but for also CBD. This current administration is not a big fan of anything to do with medical cannabis. And even though Mitch McConnell and his group got the farm bill passed, they didn't think it through because it passed in December of 2018, and we still don't have FDA ruling on this product, and it's been almost 3 years. So I think the election is the number one thing, and then the consistency of the regulation, which all goes back to the election. Mm-hmm. So I think if you see the Democrats take control of Congress, they're going to start pushing really hard on medical cannabis and recreational cannabis to make it decriminalized, which is fine, but decriminalized is step one. To move this forward, I think CBD and medical cannabis are actually in the same boat. So as we get more clarity on medical cannabis, we will get more clarity on CBD. But the number one thing that we need right now is FDA guidance, because right now the pharmaceutical companies really want to get in, but a lot of them don't want to touch it until they have that FDA guidance. So I think that is the number one thing by the end of the year. Once we have that guidance, I think 2021 will be a very good year. Me personally, in our company, we're trying to really work with as many US-based companies as we can to get their product overseas. For example, yesterday, we just shipped out samples of CBD flower with less than 2.2% THC, because that's the legal limit in Europe. We just shipped that out to Spain, and if that goes well, we'll be looking at doing about 2 metric tons a year with that company. And then another thing that I see with CBD is in the flower base, 0% THC flower. If that can ever come out, that's like the holy grail. And I know that's something that we can really sell overseas, because the US is the innovation, even now is the innovator, and we want to make sure we keep them at the top of the list as this industry moves forward.
Michael Patterson is the CEO of U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of the CBD University podcast. And a reminder, if you have not yet done so, you can subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or on our YouTube channel. That's the Global Widget YouTube channel, and the YouTube channels of our brands. You'll get notifications when new episodes are published each week. I'm Joe Augustinelli, the host of the CBD University podcast. Thanks for tuning in. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. The CBD products are not intended to treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. Always consult your personal physician about CBD and using CBD products. CBD should never be used by anyone under the age of 18. This content is not intended to provide legal advice regarding the legal status of CBD and CBD products.